In this video article, we're going to look at David Morrell's self-dialogue technique for brainstorming. Before we jump in, if you want to get an email with a timestamped overview every time I release a video like this, then head over to my website, deliberate-practice.com, sign up for my email list. There's other content at the website, plus in the weeks and months to come, I'll be creating some email subscriber only content. Okay, let's look at this self-dialogue technique. Now, it's based on material in his book, The Successful Novelist, which is a great book. If you don't know who David Morrell is, he invented the character Rambo. I'm sure you've seen or heard of some of the Sylvester Stallone films. What you won't know is that the original book, First Blood, that the first movie was based on, Rambo dies at the end of that story. So the book is very different from the jingoistic, patriotic novels that films starring Sylvester Stallone. He's also repeated material about this in some of his interviews, so you can go onto YouTube, look for his interviews and look for this, so you can hear him talk about it in his own voice. And he uses this technique at the beginning of each one of his writing projects. And basically, it's a structured conversation that he has with his typewriter instead of creating traditional plot outlines or doing free-form brainstorming. And he learnt this from Harold Robbins. He overheard something that Harold Robbins used to do. He used to have conversations with his typewriter, which he called Jennifer. And if you don't know who Harold Robbins is, he was probably the James Patterson of his time. At one point, he was the best-selling author in the world. I think we could politely say he wrote pot boilers with sex and money and all that kind of stuff. But so Morrell adapted this from Harold Robbins and created his own process out of it. There's a meta lesson just in that. If you stop the video now and take that lesson on board, you've learned a major lesson. So how does this technique work? What Dave does is he creates a conversation with his typewriter. So he might start writing, "Hi David, how are you today?" which is obviously his typewriter persona. Then he'll type back, "I'm fine, I've got an idea." And then the typewriter will type back, "Great, what's the idea?" And he'll start to explore the idea. And because the conversational format is so casual, it helps overcome blank page resistance and it eases him into a creative process. Now, he constantly and continuously challenge and questions every aspect of the story idea that he's working on with his typewriter. And this challenge forces Morrell to justify why the story matters, explain why readers should care, define what makes the story unique, and gives a chance to address weaknesses before he even gets close to writing the very first lines of the chapter. There are two questions that are key to this process, simple questions. So what? Use this to ensure that you analyze and develop ideas, and why. Answering this takes you deeper into understanding the nuances of the story, whether it's plot, whether it's character, whether it's theme. So he uses these two questions a lot. I've just clicked back onto that. Let me just go through. Okay. Comprehensive exploration. As the document develops, Morrell explores fundamental parts of the potential story, the central idea and its significance, how to best represent the idea through characters, which characters would best embody the theme. I don't know what the spell check has done on that and it's written Morrell, but that should say embody. And he can talk about setting and structural approaches that could enhance the story. So doing this process, and in a moment I'll show you or tell you how many pages these documents often run to, allows him to do a really thorough and comprehensive exploration of the idea in a very non-traditional way that really works for Morrell. And I'm trying it at the moment with a short story idea, and I will probably document some of that in the next video article. Document length and depth. Morrell, these go on for a long time. Some of them are 30 pages, single-spaced. I estimate an A4 single-spaced might be as many as 500 words, so that's 15,000 words of this document growing and expanding and everything developing organically. And by doing this, before starting a story, David has thoroughly examined the story, explored all the thematic elements, challenged himself on weaknesses, and generating momentum for himself for the actual writing ahead. So for him, if you listen to him talking about it, you can hear the excitement in his voice when he talks about it and the energy that he communicates. So it's obviously a process that's worked for him multiple times. I forget how many novels he's now published. I'm guessing somewhere in the region of 30 to 50, somewhere between that. So he's been working a long time, and his novels have sold well, generated critical acclaim. He's had obviously movie adaptations with First Blood and Rambo, but others of his books have generated movies. So he's an acclaimed writer, and this process obviously works for him. Now, he says it's got numerous advantages over traditional outlining. Firstly, it's active writing, it's not planning. The process actually engages the writing brain as you're doing it. It also provides a comprehensive record of the creative thinking. So, and he gives an example of something that happened in one of his lives, a tragedy, and he had to take several years away from a project. But then when he came back, he read through the document, and he said, in a couple of hours, I was back in that headspace and everything came back into my head, and I could just carry on as if it was a seamless transition. So you have that comprehensive record that you can look at any time and come back to and go, right, I can pick this up, and bingo, you're off to the races. He also says it generates substantial creative energy for the project ahead, which obviously one of the challenges for writers is sitting down, starting the typing, getting it going. And he says this process he considers is actually like the pre-write, although it's the pre-writing for the novel. He says it's a substantial and necessary first step for getting the novel going, and he often transitions from this document straight into the novel. So he's got some guidelines about the writing you should use. You should keep it conversational and pretty stream of consciousness. It doesn't need to be polished. No sentences need to be fixed. If you make spelling mistakes, who cares? It's the answering the questions, following where, asking yourself questions where that leads. Ideally, you're engaging the creative part of the brain, and that's another reason why you don't want to be doing any editing on it, because that disengages that and engages the analytical brain, which is not as good as providing deep and nuanced answers to the questions. In his own words, you should stay loose and be an instrument to the idea. So it's a really interesting technique. As I said, I'm using an adaptation of it on a short story, and it's very interesting, and I've got a couple of unique twists. Just wanted to talk very briefly about who this technique might work for. So I'll talk about that, and if you think that actually sounds like me, then please give it a try and see if it does work for you. Now, this process acts as a bridge between unstructured brainstorming and rigid outlining. So it's neither unstructured brainstorming nor rigid outlining, but you could probably, depending on what kind of writer you are, you could probably, after you've worked through a document like this, you'll have the shape of the story, you'll have the characters, you'll have thematic ideas, maybe setting ideas. You can maybe then reorder all that material and then write from that material. He also, one thing I didn't mention earlier, he says one of the issues with traditional outlining is it becomes very plot focused, and it often misses deep character, thematic nuance, and things like that that really can elevate a story. But in this process, you can take the time to explore those things by asking questions. Well, what about the theme? What's the theme of this story? Okay, it's revenge. What kind of character is going to be best to express that form of revenge? And someone who's been wronged. Okay, how's that character been wronged? And you can see suddenly how those questions can act as dominoes and take you deeper and deeper and deeper into different story levels, which you might not get if you use like a story model on a very surface level. So, and you could probably use this technique with a story model as well to get deeper nuances into your planning and outlining. You also get creative freedom using this technique at the same time as generating critical analysis of a potential story. If you ask the questions, why would an audience care about this? What kind of audience would care about this? What type of effect we're going to do? You can be exploring these things before you even put the first words of an idea onto the page. So that's another interesting analysis. So this is great for writers who find traditional outlining restrictive, as it doesn't. I've made an error there on the slide. They find it restrictive because what it doesn't do is maintain your excitement and discovery that you would find in the creative process. I could have reworded that better. Whereas this, you can jump around. You can go from, okay, it's going to be this kind of story. It's going to be a revenge story. And then you can go into who's the wronged character who wants revenge. You can find out, do some exploration on what's happened to this character, why he needs the revenge, how might he get revenge, how might that play out. You can even ask yourself things like, what other stories have revenge as a primary motive? Count of Monte Cristo is the first one that springs into my head. You all have read stories about revenge or have seen films about revenge, so you can go, you can then develop it further by asking what kind of scenes appeared in those stories. How did the guy in the Count of Monte Cristo get his revenge? What did he do? Or the Four Feathers is another classic story that is about a kind of revenge. You'll have your own body of stories and films that you've seen that have similarities to whatever you're working on, and you can explore in your brain, how did this happen in this story? And that might generate ways that you can come up with ideas in your story. So it's a really interesting process. I've been having a lot of fun with it. So I advise you to give it a try, whatever kind of writer you are, because unless you're consistently producing finished stories that you're shipping on a regular basis, then this might be another way to unlock your creativity to start getting more stories down on paper. And it also, all of the creativity and excitement gets combined with thorough development of all the story ideas. So not just the plot, the character, the theme, settings, all that kind of thing. So it's a really interesting little exercise, which is surprisingly easy to do. As I say, I'm developing it. I'm working on it with a short story idea, and I'll come back to that in a future video. So also remember, it's a caveat I give in lots of my videos, every writer needs to find their own writing process. If this works for you, great. If it doesn't, it's something to add to your list of things that don't work, and you may find there's one or two things in it that do work for you, in which case you lift them and adapt them for your creative process. Just how David lifted this from hearing something Harold Robbins did and adapted it for himself. And as I've said, I'll do a follow-up article adapting this process for brainstorming short stories. There's some material I've done on this, which I've put in the Writing Vault, including some notes on a couple of David Morrell interviews and a couple of teaching notes that have been derived from that. Writing Vault is a resource I'm putting together for aspiring and or frustrated fiction writers. The URL's there. Go and check out the page by clicking on that, see if that might be something that's of interest to you. It changes every day, it grows every day, more and more stuff's going into it, but the important thing is not to try and consume everything because it's impossible. It would already take you a year. In 3 months' time that will be up to 2 years or 3 years. The important thing is to take the material that's germane to where you are as a writer. And when I always welcome new subscribers, I always say, what kind of writer are you? Where are you at? What problems are holding you back? And ask them to write back, answer those simple questions, and then I send them an email pointing them to 4 or 5 resources that they can immediately go and check out and start adapting for their own writing process. If you do have any questions for me, my email address is paul@deliberate-practice.com. Drop me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you for your time watching this video. In the next video, as I say, it'll be 2 or 3 days. I will do a follow-up article talking about using this process and how it worked for me brainstorming a short story.